Loads and loads of people have been asking me how I get a really smooth finish to my needle felted sculptures. So I decided to make a video on it for you today so I can show you exactly what I do so you can then replicate it in your work and hopefully achieve the same result. So I've got my piggy head here to give you an example of how I get everything looking lovely and smooth without any of those naughty strands of wool poking out. So in this video today, we're going to be looking at getting your sculptures super uber smooth. So to do this, first of all, you're going to need your felting mat, and you're also going to need some fine twisted needles, some fine twisted needles that I have here. As you can see, they've got the twisting of the needles along the shaft of the darting needle. And then you also want some very fine or extra fine twisted needles as well. So you're going to need some fine and extra fine twisted needles in order to achieve this really smooth look. I'd also recommend getting some needle felting pens as well, just because I find it easier. The whole motion of felting is a lot easier having the needles in a pen, and it also just speeds the process up for you as well because you've got two needles rather than a single needle, so you're kind of timesing your speed by 2 if you like. So the next thing you need is your wool. Now, when you buy any wool, and it's going to be the wool that you're going to see on the exterior of your sculpture, you want to make sure that it's a bats first of all to get that smooth look, and also that it's got very, very short hair. So as you can see here on the bats that I'm showing you on the camera, this is a New Zealand merino wool bats in a flesh colour. And as you can see on the camera, if I hold it up, it's got these lovely short fibres to it. What you don't want is a wool bat with long fibres, because what tends to happen with long fibres is that you'll have very long, sometimes quite thick strands poking out of your sculpture, and we definitely don't want that. So try and get something where the wool fibres are shorter rather than longer, because it's just easier to felt down and get a really smooth, cohesive, finished look to your sculpture. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just going to roll this wool into a ball and just show you the process I would use if I was making, say, a head like the pig head I showed you a moment ago. So all I'm going to do is just roll this relatively tightly, just to speed things up a bit, into a ball shape. And you can see here, even just by rolling it, it's got a lovely smooth finish to it already. So you're halving down your felting time by just choosing the right wool. And I get this particular wool from the makers, who are based in Nailsworth in the UK. And I think it's like, I don't know, I haven't checked their prices recently, but it used to be about sort of £6 for 50 grams, something like that. So they're not the cheapest, but they do excellent wool and excellent needle felting tools. The makers with a double S on the end. Okay, so I'm just going to use my fine twisted needles now, just to felt this into a ball shape. Remember to use your nails as a barrier if you're not using needle felting gloves, okay? And always felt down into the mat. You can felt on an angle, but always keep your fingers well out the way, and you're still felting into the mat, you're just felting on a bit more of an angle. So I'm just going to turn it round. And the fine needles do give a nice smooth finish, but when you're shaping your sculpture as well, so if you're adding details like facial features and things like that, you really want to use those extra fine needles to get that lovely smooth finish, but also get that lovely intricate detail into your piece. Because I think a lot of the time when we look at a sculpture, any sculpture at all, it's the small details that we don't notice that really lift the piece and make it look professional and make it look interesting. So by using your extra fine needles to add those additional features in, whether they be laughter lines or I don't know, some sort of frowns on the forehead or something around the eyes, just to make the eyes pop a bit more, it's really worth doing, even if it's really subtle, because it does make a huge difference. That's my personal opinion anyway. So I'm just felting all this down, and I'll come back to you once I've got my ball shape in place. Okay, so I've finished the ball shape, and I just need you to humour me now, because we need to imagine that this is the head of, say, a fairy or something like that we've just made. And if I hold this up to the camera, you should be able to see we've got quite a few indentations and lumps and bumps here that we want to get rid of. So what I want to do now is I want to take some more of the wool, the Merino New Zealand wool bats. I'm going to take lots and lots. And I'm just going to place this over the ball shape that we've just felted down, okay? So you don't need a really thick amount, but you just need enough so that you get a good coverage and it's going over sort of like the whole front center of the face and past the sides. Don't worry about the back unless you're creating something that's bald-headed or something that doesn't have any hair, because if you're making a fairy or something, you're going to be adding hair into this later on anyway, so you don't need to worry if this looks a bit ugly, lumpy and bumpy, because it's going to get covered over. We don't want to sort of make unnecessary work for ourselves if we don't need to, so don't worry about that. So I'm just going to turn this over and I'm going to swap now from my fine needles to my extra fine needles, okay? And again, I'm just going to felt this down, and already this is felting, and already I can tell that this is penetrating my wool a lot more easily because these needles are so incredibly fine. These needles are really excellent for creating noses, very small, delicate noses on characters. I love using them because you can really get in there and create the nostrils and all the kind of the angles that you would have on a nose with relatively minimal effort. And if you would like me to do a video on how I create things like noses and eyes for more human type characters, let me know and I will do that for you. So all I'm doing at the moment is just felting this into place. And I'm kind of working from the inside out, so starting from the center and then working outwards with my needles side by side. And I will keep these now. I won't go back to the fine needles unless I'm creating an area for the eyes, a little eye socket. I'm going to stick with these fine needles for the rest of the face, or the imaginary face that we're making anyway. So inside out, just felting down all those loose strands of wool, getting it nice and tight. And then once everything's locked into position and secured down, you can then go back through and felt the center of the face. And because these are quite delicate, they don't get rid of any shape that you've created too much. So if, for instance, you've created more of a, say this is the chin here and this is the top of the head, and I've angled my chin a bit here, you're not going to destroy that angle because these are so delicate. The other thing you want to bear in mind when you're doing this is I'm doing very light stabbing motions. I'm not going in really deeply with the extra fine needles here. Just very light stabbing motions, just to make sure I'm locking that extra wool that I've just added into place, but not going really deeply. We want to be as minimal as possible with this. So less is best, because we don't want to have those indentations when it's finished. So we just want to make sure that we're kind of doing the absolute least amount of stabbing that we need to do, but in order to get everything locked down into place. And also you need to remember, especially with anything like faces or anything where you've got a lot of detail, you're going to be adding more as you go along anyway in terms of indentations and creating lines and things like that. So you're kind of not wanting to spend too much time doing this, because you're going to be doing more felting as you progress with your sculpture. So you know that eventually it's all going to get felted down really well anyway. I think I made sense there, but please let me know if you want me to clarify that, because sometimes I talk and I think to myself, I don't know if I'd understand that. Okay, so just going to get rid of any lumps and bumps, any little air pockets that might have developed where I've layered that wool on top. And I'm just going to continue stabbing like this, and I'll come back to you once I've stabbed everything into place and it's looking lovely and smooth. Okay, so I'm just going to hold this to the camera now. So that's all stabbed into place now, and you can see it already looks infinitely better than when we were using the fine needles a moment ago. It's definitely a lot smoother. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my thumb. I'm just going to rub the wool with my thumbs just to dissipate any of those indentations and just get a smoother finish. And because it's a short-haired wool, it doesn't really unravel, because certain wools, if you did this, it would become all fuzzy and horrible, whereas this doesn't do this. And if you do get a little bit of fuzz, what you can do is you can either use your embroidery scissors just to trim it away, or you can just go back in with your fine needles and just touch up very gently. You see here, oh, I shouldn't do this because I'm air felting, but just for the benefit of this, I'll show you. I'm just doing this really gently and just kind of tidying up any of those loose fuzzy areas that might have occurred from me rubbing it. But you don't need to spend a long time on it, because otherwise you kind of end up in a vicious cycle of rubbing and then refelting again. But that is how I get a nice smooth finish to my heads and my animals and things like that. The key points to remember with this are: make sure you're using a short fibered wool, make sure that you're using fine needles and extra fine needles. You don't want to use medium needles, because the medium needles tend to leave more of an indentation, which is harder to cover up as you progress. So stick with the fine needles and the extra fine needles, you can't go wrong. And then it's all about just a bit of patience and you will get some super amazing, super smooth sculptures made. So I really hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for subscribing to my channel, because it really helps me make more videos to help you guys out. Please like this video if you enjoyed it, and I will see you again tomorrow with more needle felting hints and tips. See you soon. Bye.